Okay guys, so in this video we are going to talk about BDD, so let's get into it. So I had a request for this video where basically someone wanted to know how to work in a BDD fashion. So what we're going to cover is what is BDD, how do you work in a BDD style, and what tools do you actually need to do this. So BDD, or Behavior Driven Development, is just a style of working where you basically define a set of features in a feature file of some sort. And then that file acts as living documentation where that is the agreement between you and the stakeholders within the company that these steps are going to happen in these different scenarios, and then you implement tests, test code basically, that matches against those specified features. This will be much clearer when I actually show you how to do this, but the strength of this is that you pretty much have a way to assert that a feature works in the intended fashion. And that's a great thing because usually when you write something like unit tests, you're just testing a single piece of logic, but with BDD, you're actually simulating a actual user journey throughout your system. And that is exactly the sort of testing that it becomes invaluable when you have a more sophisticated system. Now, I'm just going to touch on a few rules that I think are very important to carry with you when you do BDD. And the first rule is do not try to write BDD tests for every possible feature. Just off the bat, if you're a beginner and you're starting out with BDD, you may think that, oh, this is pretty cool. I should just, whenever I have a feature, write a BDD test for it. Absolutely not. If you do that, it's going to grind all of your tests down to a halt very quickly. BDD is writing BDD tests are a very heavy thing because you're basically simulating a user actually using the system. And if you have several hundreds of tests, and you're going to see in a moment when you add things such as different browsers into the mix, you need to test in different screen sizes, different dimensions. It's going to be mobile, it's going to be a tablet, it's going to be desktop. There are like so many permutations that it becomes really slow very quickly. So the rule of thumb here is that you write tests that simulate the most critical paths for a user. What do I mean by that? Well, basically what I mean by that is that imagine that your system has a set of features that are so critical that if they don't work, you consider your application to be completely broken. An example would be, say that you have a web shop and for some reason the purchase button is broken. Now that's something that should definitely have a BDD test. You should have a test that simulates a user going to your shopping page, buying some stuff, going to the checkout page, and then paying for those items, because that's the core heart, that's the heart of the business, right? It's super important to have that working at all times. Perfect use case for a BDD test. And then you should create a strict convention between you and your coworkers for how to define steps and features. I'm just going to show you the way that I do this. Now, the general way I do it is that I create this features directory here, and then in the features directory I have a steps directory, like some support. This is specific to Gherkin or to Cucumber.js, which is the thing we're using, but usually I have a directory called steps and one that is, and then either the different feature files or something like that. But I try to group everything in a, like, each directory represents a feature. So the login feature, as you can see here, has its own feature file inside of the login directory. And in a moment, like, you will see later why I think that this is a very good grouping. But you can have your own convention. Just make sure that you follow it. And then for steps, I usually try to keep my step definitions a little bit more generic, because I want to get as much reuse out of each step as possible, but at the same time not miss out on the very natural English or the natural language that we're going to use when we actually define a feature. It will become clearer later, but you can have your own path. Just make sure that you have something that everybody understands, because trust me when I say this, if you're working on a really large system and you have BDD driven development in place, you're gonna have so many feature files and so many steps. It's very likely that you will duplicate things quite often, especially if you don't have a convention. BDD tests should run before every release into production. Hopefully this makes sense. So you create a BDD suite of tests. Now it's important that they actually run before you actually release anything to production. These are some tests, some rules to follow. You can do what you want with them, but I found them to be very useful. So here is our little Express server. Here is our amazing application. All it is a little, I can actually show you the interface, that might be actually easier. This is all it is. It's a login page. So you can say foo, you can say bar, and then it says login success. If I say something else and something else, it says login failed. And if I try to submit my form without it being complete, it stops me. Or if I don't have enough characters, or if I have too many characters, it's going to stop me. Little tiny login page application type of thing. And here you see the server-side code. So we're using the Express URL encoded middleware, so we can submit forms. And then here is our login page. So we serve up, and here we handle the post to our server. And as you can see, we've just hard-coded name and password here, and if any of those aren't where they're supposed to be, we're just gonna send the user to the failed endpoint, and otherwise it's gonna go to success. And then we serve up the appropriate file. That's pretty much it, really. So here's our form. Nothing fancy, it's just a static form with some basic validation. You can see I've just added a little bit of pattern here and something we call data test, which will be clear in just a moment, and a password and some patterns here as well. And here's the input. Success page, nothing fancy here. Failed page, nothing fancy. All right, so this is our simple little application. So if we just rewind now, so the core question was, how do we work in a BDD fashion? Well, the first thing we're going to have to do is to get the story. So I've just created a very simple Kanban board here. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to grab our story. And our story says that, okay, we should add a welcome message to the success and failed pages. Okay, we can do that. So let's go here to our feature file. So this is a feature file that someone else has already created for us, which is pretty nifty, because that means that we can just add to an existing feature instead of having to recreate one from scratch. So here it says, okay, so it's feature login. As a user, I should be able to log into the application if I provide the right name and password. Otherwise, I should be shown a login failed page. All right. As a user, I can log in. Given I am on the login page and I enter foo as my name and I enter bar as my password, when I click the login button, then I should be on the login success page. Cool. So this is a scenario. Now, this is how all of this actually works. As you can see here, this is just pretty much English, more or less. Like, it's a little bit weird, but that's because I've worded it this way. You can just use plain English if you want to. Now, if you want like a hot tip for installing something to your Visual Studio editor, I highly recommend Cucumber Gherkin Full Support. This one here. This is the one I'm using, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it is. Yes, it is. So this is like the best thing ever. The people who took time to actually put this together were really nice, because this gives you like all the syntax highlighting, and it gives you assists and stuff like that. So you can you get a lot of help. And one of my absolute favorite things, and this is, I would say, is like critical for this to actually work, is that you get IntelliSense for already used phrases. I am on the There we are. So here you see already defined steps. This is one of the best features ever. Like ever. This is one of the most powerful things, because this thing searches all of your feature files for your step definitions and checks if they can find like something that matches the description that you have given. This gives you complete reuse. In other words, I never ever have to re-implement I enter foo as my name if somebody has already created this step. I can just reuse it. I don't have to do anything. If I need anything that's already been implemented, it's all for free. So the more tests you write, the quicker it actually becomes to write even further tests. Someone makes the initial investment, and then everybody else can reuse it. And that's why as you can see here, I try to be a little bit more generic. So things like I clicked the login button. I could have just hard-coded this and said, okay, it should be the login button, and then just created a test that specifically knows how to click the login button on the login page. But by doing this, I can actually make this a little bit more generic and actually hook into create a step that is better than that. So let's say that I have my steps here, and let's look at my clicks. So here I say when I click the string button, and this is an asynchronous function, and all it does is that it gets a string, and here it goes and calls this.page, which we're going to touch on that in a moment, but this is just my my browser runner, the runner that actually runs the browser that is going to run all of these tests, right? And then I'm using Puppeteer here, so a page is just a Puppeteer page in this scenario. And then I do an access, and then I hook into this selector, data-test, and then I find the thing that is, technically I should have called this a button as well, because I'm a little bit more specific there. But you can see the logic here, right? That you're just accessing that element, clicking it, and then returning that element, and that's it. And this is a generic click test. Like this step, this will work for pretty much any test I want to write, as long as it has this data test thing. So what's that about? Well, it's actually very simple. The reason why I use this data test password, data test name, is because it creates a connection between my markup and my test, like my actual running code, and the test. If I look at this HTML here, I can see that, okay, this input, there is a selector that is connected here. So I know that if I want to do a direct access to this thing here has a test associated with it, so I'm not gonna by mistake change it. A lot of people use CSS and class names and stuff like that. Don't do that, because if you do that, anybody who sees a CSS class name and says, oh, okay, so this is like an input, a password or something else, they don't understand that there is a connection between the tests and this element. But with this, it becomes super clear that, okay, I do direct access, and then I get this thing, or I get that thing, or I get this thing, and so forth. This is extremely useful, so I really encourage you to use this pattern. Same thing goes for here, like the body is data-test login, and I'm going to reuse that in page visits. So here I have some steps declared as well. So given I am on the string page, and then I get a string, and then I just pattern match on which page I'm actually going to go to. Then this is the then step, I should be on the string page. And here I do the same thing. I wait for the selector data-test and then just the string. And this is, if we have a look here, I should be on the login success page. And if we go to my success page here, you will see that I on the body actually have this attribute saying login success. That's me explicitly naming for testing purposes this page login success. I can easily change it, but it also makes it very easy for me to make an access. So I'm not using something weird like, oh, if the document name is that, or if the URL is that. This is super easy. It's explicit from both ends. I can just search for this term here, and then immediately find all of the tests that reference this specific element. So I really encourage you to do this. And then we have my input. So I enter string as my string, and that gives me two strings. And all this basically does is that it grabs the element and then types in whatever I inputted as string, and then returns the element. It's a very generic input step, if you will, that can help me with these things here. And that's exactly what it is. So let's say, for the sake of argument now, that I'm actually going to go and implement something. Let's say we should do something like and should see, let's say, let's call it a welcome message. Like so. Now it's going to warn me here, and it's going to say that, oh, was unable to find step for and I should see a welcome message. And that's exactly right, because we haven't implemented it just yet. Cucumber, yes. So now I'm going to try to run Cucumber. And you can see here that it runs, and then it gives me a U, which says it stands for undefined, I think. And finally, when it's done, yes. So here I have a bunch of past things and something that is undefined. Now this is one of my favorite things with Cucumber.js, at least this implementation, because what it does is that it just, I write my new step, and then it tells me, oh yeah, you have an undefined step here, you need to implement that. Okay, I'll just copy paste this thing here. Let's see here. There are no real steps here that I would say are like really useful, so I'll just create a new one called login.js. Like I have generic things, and then I have things that are a little bit more specific than that. So let's do that, and let's do then from Cucumber, and then let's run my tests again. P stands for pending, which is expected because I've just moved this into a pending state, that it's unimplemented. And there we are. So yeah, so now it's not undefined anymore, it's just pending because I haven't implemented it yet. And this is where it now becomes important to understand how we're going to do, we basically just created the basis for our for this this new feature, right? So we know that if we go to the login success page, we should see this. We should also see it if we go to the login failed page. And here we have another thing which is interesting. This thing here, so these are the success and failure cases, which makes sense. As a user, I will see the failed login screen if I fail the login. But here it's something different. It's called a scenario outline. So as a user, I will not be able to submit the form if the name or password has a invalid length or invalid characters. So let's go through this. What's this feature about? So given I am on the login page and I enter name as my name and password as my password, when I click the login button, then I should be on the login page. In other words, this test isn't actually going to land, it's supposed to land us on login success or login failed. It's just supposed to validate that if I give it a bunch of invalid input, which is these data tables here, then it should still keep me on the same login page. And this is the reason, as you probably suspected by now, why I added that patterns check, so that I can showcase this amazing feature. So if you have a bunch of permutations, let's say that you have a bunch of values that you need to validate against something, you can create a table like this with all of the different versions or combinations that you want to create. You can create as many as you want, and then you can reference them. So this scenario outline is, a scenario runs once. A scenario outline runs for as many times that for as many rows rather as there are in these examples. So this is going to run all of these tests with the different inputs until it's satisfied all of these requirements, which is pretty damn cool if you're doing something like that this is doing. It's just testing different combinations of invalid input to make a proper login right. So we're going to ignore that, and we're just going to focus on this. So let's have a look at this called world.js. This is a Cucumber.js specific thing, but I just want to go through the actual setup code before we implement it. So here you can see that I have a requirement on a before and an after. And just as in most unit testing frameworks, this is just something that's going to run before each scenario, and this is going to run after each scenario. And then I use Puppeteer. You can use Selenium WebDriver or something like that. I usually, well, if you really need to be able to run in multiple browsers, that's probably the way to go, but I'll raise my finger and I will warn you, and I will say that unless you really are paranoid about browser incompatibilities, be a little bit careful, because imagine that, okay, so we had like 10 scenarios. So that multiply that by all the browsers you want to test in, and then multiply that by all the screen dimensions you want to test on as well, and you can start doing the math and realizing that shit, this is gonna explode in overhead, and there's going to be a lot of tests that are going to run, just saying. So here we basically, I'm just reusing their word, which is world for some reason. starting up my browser, creating a page, and then I create this close, like a private variable. I need this later on because I want to run the after hook and close the browser so I don't have any running browsers or something like that that shouldn't be out there. And then I declare a page, and then I have two other before statements here. So what these are just ways for me to define different hooks. So I can create a tag, such as say mobile, and then I can annotate a test with that tag and have this hook run for all of those tests, and then I can say tablet and do the same thing. And in my case, I'm just using it to set different viewports so that I can test for different screen dimensions. But you can use this for anything. You could just say that, oh, these tests here should be, this tag here should mean that the test should run in Firefox, or it should run in Safari or something like that. You can use these tags for pretty much anything. And the world object in this scenario is just a common denominator that's just going to be possible to reference throughout the entire suite. That's the information that we need, because when we look at, say, this stuff here, we basically want to grab something like this. This start page, so you can think of this here as what they call the world. It's just the common reference to these interfaces we created up here, or the instance of the page that we started up in our before statement. And then let's go to login, and let's change this. And let's change that from this to be something like welcome. Alright, so let's try to run that. Boom. And why is that? Yes, because I forgot to say async. So now that's going to blow up. And there it blows up. And if you're paying attention, you should know why that's going to blow up. And it's going to blow up for one very good reason. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Yes, function time.ensure that the promise is resolved within 500 minutes. And I should see a welcome message. The reason why it's blowing up in these two cases is because we haven't added our welcome message just yet, right? So let's do that. Welcome. Data-test welcome. Let's do that. And let's do that for the failed page as well. And now, if we run those tests, they should pass. And Lord and behold, they actually pass. How amazing is that? So I don't know why you would say welcome to someone who've hit the failed page, but we do, because that's just how we roll in this company. But this is pretty much us done with that feature. Now, ideally you should have that as part of testing and so forth, but we are going to skip all of that, and just say that that's done. Now, the next thing that we want to have a look at is to add a test for mobile and tablet, and we've kind of already touched on that. So this is a little bit of a tricky one, because you basically need to duplicate all of your tests to do this sort of thing. It's a little bit of a hassle, I'm going to admit. And it's a little bit of a hassle because it's really tricky for you to know what the right way to do this sort of stuff is. You could create, if you really want to, so you can create like a scenario outline and then just basically use a table and say that, all right, you're going to run for this screen width and this screen width and this screen width. You can do that, but I've found that to be less effective. What I really want to be able to do is to run all of this stuff in parallel. So I use a tag system instead. So, and I kind of just buy the duplication of tests in the scenario, because that way I can do something like this, which I think is pretty cool. I can say something like, let's say at mobile, like so, and then I can say -tag at mobile. And what that's going to do is that it's just going to run all the tests that are annotated with the tag mobile. And this is very powerful, because if I have a CI pipeline or something like that, then I can tag all of the tests that are going to run for mobile and just run those in one process. the ones that are going to run on a tablet in one process, and those are going to run for a desktop in one process. And this way I can get done much quicker, because otherwise I have to do it linearly, and then that's 3 times the time, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do this. Login dot mobile. And as you probably can suspect, I'm just going to do this. And then I'm going to do this. And that. And then that's pretty much it, really. So now we can run our test just for the mobile screens. And as we know now from our previous encounter with the world thing here, it's going to hit this tag first, because this runs for everything. And then it's going to just instantiate my browser and my page and like all of that good stuff. And then it's going to hit this tag here and set the viewport to this viewport. And that's pretty much it. It's going to skip this because this annotation doesn't exist on that test. So that's us done with that, and then we can do the same thing for tablets. Tablet. And then we do it for the tablet. And there we are, running the exact same thing. So this is pretty much how you work with BDD, and I can just swear by it. It works extremely well, especially for more complicated features when your system has grown to a size where you're pretty much in a situation where it's impossible for you to do manual testing for all of this. Now this is a very simple application, but I hope you get the idea. And here you can also hopefully understand like my reasoning behind always having a directory that represents the feature, because you might have, I mean, it might be that this login file here gets really, really complicated and you have even more features in the login flow. Maybe there's going to be a like button, or there's going to be some other features that's part of the login page or something like that. And then you can split it even further by saying something like, I don't know, like button dot login or login dot like button dot mobile dot something something. This makes it very clean, and you kind of group everything into one place. So this is pretty much how you work with BDD. I hope you found this enjoyable. Have a great day.